Sarah Johnson had always known the Detroit skyline like the back of her hand. For the past 15 years, she had worked at Ford's flagship factory, watching the rise and fall of the city's heart and soul, the American automobile industry. But nothing could have prepared her for the news that would shake her to her core. It was just another ordinary morning when Sarah walked into the break room. The buzz of chatter and the hum of coffee machines filled the air. But as soon as she glanced at the TV mounted on the wall, her world shifted. A breaking news banner flashed across the screen: Ford may shut down U.S. production amid economic struggles. Her stomach lurched. "Did you hear that?" someone whispered behind her. "Ford's pulling out. Closing up shop right here in Detroit." Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. The voice behind her faded into the background, and her mind raced. Closing the factory? It couldn't be true. Ford, the company that had once been the pride of the American auto industry, the company that had given her a steady paycheck for years, was now contemplating abandoning its roots. The factory floor, the place she'd spent countless hours assembling cars and connecting parts, felt more distant with every passing second. It was as if a shadow had fallen over it. Her job, her livelihood, was suddenly on the line. She grabbed her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed Tom's number. He was one of her oldest friends, a mechanical engineer at Tesla. They had been close for years, even though they worked for rival companies. Tom had always been the one to keep her grounded, offering a voice of reason when times got tough. But now, as she heard the faint buzzing from the other end of the line, Sarah knew she needed answers. "Sarah? What's up?" Tom's voice crackled through the phone, still carrying the same calm tone that she had always relied on. "Did you hear about Ford? They're talking about closing the factories here." "Everything's going down the drain," Sarah said, her voice tight. She was trying not to sound desperate, but it was hard. "Yeah, I heard," Tom replied quietly. "Look, Sarah, I know this is hard, but you've got to see this for what it is. It's a massive restructuring of the industry. Ford's just trying to adapt to the changing market." She could hear the underlying calmness in his voice, but it did nothing to reassure her. Sarah wasn't blind to the economic shifts that had been happening, the rise of electric vehicles, the competition from companies like Tesla, and the ongoing struggles of traditional car manufacturers. But that didn't make it any easier to face. "You don't get it, Tom," she said, her voice shaking now. "This is my job, my family's future. I've been at Ford for years. This is where I've built my life. And now it's all just gone." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sarah could hear Tom sigh, and then, almost reluctantly, he spoke. "I get it, Sarah. I really do. And listen, if it all falls apart, there might be options. Tesla's always looking for skilled workers. Maybe there's a place for you with us." A bitter laugh escaped Sarah's lips, though she wasn't sure if it was from disbelief or frustration. "Tesla? Really, Tom? You think I'm just supposed to forget about everything? Ford, my coworkers, the history I've been a part of for so long. I'm not just going to switch teams like that." Tom's voice softened. "I know. It's not about switching teams, Sarah. It's about surviving. The whole industry is shifting. And I just want you to know there's a way forward, even if it's not the one you thought it would be." Sarah hung up the phone, her mind spinning. Tom's words stung, but deep down, she couldn't ignore the reality. Ford wasn't the invincible giant it once was. It was fighting for survival just like the rest of them. And with Tesla's rise, it was clear, things were changing. Fast. She walked to her locker and shoved her phone into her bag. Her thoughts were clouded, her chest tight. The world around her seemed to blur, as though the factory that had been a constant in her life was slowly slipping away. Outside, the winter wind howled as Sarah stepped onto the sidewalk. It was the kind of cold that cut through your jacket, biting into your bones. She pulled her coat tighter around her body, but it didn't do much to ease the growing anxiety gnawing at her insides. The uncertainty in the air was palpable. There were rumors circulating, whispers of what might happen next. Some employees were already speculating that Ford would lay off thousands of workers, sending them into a job market already flooded with competitors. The thought of being one of those workers, standing in the unemployment line, made her stomach turn. But as Sarah walked to her car, one thought kept resurfacing: what if everything she had worked for was about to disappear? She was no stranger to struggle. Life had never been easy for Sarah. Raised in a small apartment on the outskirts of Detroit, she had watched her parents work long hours just to make ends meet. When she got the job at Ford all those years ago, it felt like a lifeline, a way out of the cycles of poverty and uncertainty. Now, that lifeline was beginning to fray. She started the engine of her car, the sound of the engine roaring to life, but it felt hollow, almost mechanical. There was no joy in it today. Only dread. As she drove through the quiet streets of Detroit, the city she had called home for so long, Sarah couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would she still be able to provide for her son? Could she keep her family safe? Or would everything she had built come crumbling down, just like the city's crumbling factories that dotted the landscape? She wasn't sure. But one thing was clear: Ford's announcement had changed everything. And Sarah Johnson wasn't ready to let it go without a fight. What happens when the heart of America's auto industry starts to beat slower? As the camera zooms out on Sarah, the cold, empty streets of Detroit fade into the background. Her journey had just begun, and the road ahead was uncertain. Would she find a way to survive this upheaval, or would she be left behind in a world that was rapidly changing? Only time would tell. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Sarah Johnson's life hadn't always been easy, but she'd never complained. Her story was one of quiet resilience and hard-earned success, carved out from the rough edges of Detroit, a city that had weathered its own share of storms. But as she sat in her small kitchen that evening, a cup of coffee in hand, staring out the window at the snow falling gently outside, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the path that had brought her to this moment, the moment when everything she knew and loved was at risk of falling apart. Growing up in a modest apartment on Detroit's west side, Sarah had always known that life wasn't going to be handed to her on a silver platter. Her parents, both factory workers, had worked long hours at the local plant, often coming home exhausted and worn out. There was love in their home, but there wasn't much else. They had scraped by, doing their best to provide for Sarah and her younger brother, Mike. It was a constant struggle to keep food on the table and bills paid. But Sarah's parents always told her that education and hard work were the keys to breaking free from the cycle. Never let anyone tell you what you can't do, her mother had always said. You're capable of more than you think, Sarah. Her mother's words had stuck with her over the years, even when life tested her in ways she couldn't have imagined. After graduating high school, Sarah had immediately set her sights on landing a job at Ford, the company that symbolized Detroit's working-class pride. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was determined. She studied the mechanics of cars in her spare time, learned about the assembly line, and familiarized herself with every aspect of the job. At 22, she got the call. Ford was hiring, and she was in. It felt like a dream. The pay was better than anything she had ever imagined, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she had a stable future ahead of her. The factory became her second home, and her co-workers became her second family. But nothing had prepared her for the emotional toll the job would take. The long hours, the grueling work, the noise of machines humming and banging around her, it was all part of the life she had chosen. But it had come at a cost. She missed birthdays, holidays, and family gatherings. There were nights when she'd come home, exhausted, only to see her son, Jason, already asleep. She regretted those moments. But she also knew she was doing it for him, so that one day, he wouldn't have to struggle the way she had. And then there was the pressure. Being a woman in a male-dominated industry wasn't easy, and Sarah had often found herself fighting to be taken seriously. She worked harder, smarter, and longer to prove herself, but there were times when she felt like she was constantly swimming upstream. She had learned to be tough, to stand her ground, to speak up for herself. And, slowly but surely, she had earned respect, not just from her co-workers but from the higher-ups at Ford as well. But even with the respect, the long hours had started to take their toll. The work was draining, both physically and emotionally. Sarah had barely any time for herself, and though her love for Jason kept her going, there were moments when she felt like she was losing touch with the person she used to be. It was as if the weight of her responsibilities was slowly erasing her identity. Sarah's relationship with her ex-husband, Rob, had been strained for years. Their marriage had started off with love and hope, but as time went on, the stress of financial pressures and her demanding job took its toll. Rob had always been supportive of her career, but he had never understood the sacrifice it required. When they had separated 2 years ago, it had been amicable, but still painful. They had shared custody of Jason, and Sarah made sure to spend as much time as possible with her son when he wasn't at school. Despite the breakup, Rob had always remained an important part of her life, especially when it came to raising Jason. Despite everything, Sarah remained optimistic. She had her routine. She had her job at Ford, the place that had given her a sense of purpose. She had her son, who was growing up to be a bright, kind-hearted kid. And she had her friends, including Tom, who had been by her side through thick and thin. Though their friendship had been complicated by their careers at rival companies, they always found a way to reconnect. Tom was a reminder that not everything had to be about work, there were still moments of joy and laughter to be had. But as Sarah sat in the quiet of her kitchen, sipping her coffee, she couldn't shake the feeling that the world she had worked so hard to build was slipping through her fingers. Ford's possible closure had shaken her to the core. It wasn't just the loss of her job, it was the uncertainty about the future, about everything she had known and believed in. The factory was a part of her life, a part of Detroit's legacy. It was where she had poured her sweat and tears. And now, it felt like all of that might disappear. She thought about Tom's offer to join Tesla. She had been reluctant to even consider it. Tesla and Ford were on opposite sides of a battle for the future of the auto industry, and she had always felt loyal to Ford. But loyalty only went so far when it came to survival. Her phone buzzed on the counter, pulling Sarah out of her thoughts. It was a message from Tom. "Hey, I know this is tough, but just remember, you've got options. If you need to talk, I'm here." Sarah's fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she didn't respond right away. She wasn't ready to make that decision. The idea of leaving everything she had known, everything she had fought for, felt impossible. But she also knew that change was coming, and it wasn't just coming for Ford. It was coming for all of them. As Sarah gazed out the window at the falling snow, she thought about what Tom had said. There were options. But right now, all she could think about was how everything had changed in the blink of an eye. And she couldn't help but wonder, would she find the strength to fight for what she had, or would the storm of change leave her behind? The news of Ford's potential closure hung in the air like a storm cloud, casting a shadow over Sarah's every thought. It wasn't just a piece of corporate gossip, it was a looming reality that threatened everything she had worked for. That night, she lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities. Could this be it? Could Ford really shut down its production in the U.S.? Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her restless thoughts. It was another message from Tom. "Have you heard from anyone at Ford yet? Rumors are flying. They might start laying off employees soon." Sarah's fingers hovered over her phone. She was reluctant to respond immediately, not because she didn't want to talk to Tom, but because the situation was so uncertain. How could she even begin to process the magnitude of what was happening? Ford closing down would affect not just her but the entire workforce in Detroit. The impact would ripple through her community, her friends, her family. The city's identity was tied to the factories and the cars that had once rolled off the assembly lines with pride. She couldn't help but think back to her first day at Ford. It had felt like she was stepping into something bigger than herself, a part of the proud legacy of Detroit. The scent of oil and steel, the hum of machinery, and the sound of co-workers working in tandem had filled her with a sense of purpose. Over the years, those first-day nerves had faded into the rhythm of the factory, but the pride never left her. She had built something with her own hands, something that mattered. But now, as she looked out over the empty streets of her neighborhood the following morning, that sense of pride felt fragile, as if it might crumble with a single blow. Sarah had always believed in the strength of her community. Detroit wasn't just a city, it was a symbol of American resilience. Despite economic downturns, social unrest, and the shifting tides of industry, the people here had always found a way to bounce back. But this felt different. Ford's legacy was on the line, and with it, the future of thousands of workers who had spent their lives building cars that became part of the American dream. As she drove to work the next day, Sarah's phone rang. It was Karen, one of her closest colleagues. Karen had been working at Ford for almost as long as Sarah had, and their friendship had blossomed over shared experiences and late-night conversations about life outside of the factory walls. "Sarah, have you seen the latest news? They're saying Ford might announce cuts within the next week. Everyone's talking about it down here." Karen's voice was strained, edged with worry. "I don't know what we're going to do if that happens. I can't lose this job, Sarah. I just can't." The knot in Sarah's stomach tightened as she gripped the steering wheel. She could hear the panic in Karen's voice, and it only amplified her own fears. What if this wasn't just another round of corporate restructuring? What if Ford really was closing its doors for good? Where would that leave her, and her friends? Detroit? Would it be left in the dust? "I know, Karen," Sarah replied softly. "I'm trying not to think about it too much. Let's just see what happens. We can't make any decisions until we know for sure." But even as she said the words, Sarah knew the reality. That not thinking about it strategy was getting harder and harder to implement. The truth was, she was already thinking about it, and she was terrified. As she pulled into the parking lot of the Ford factory, the usual bustle of workers outside the entrance was subdued. People walked with their heads down, their expressions clouded with uncertainty. The usual morning camaraderie was absent, replaced by whispers and hushed conversations. Sarah felt the weight of the tension in the air, and it hit her like a physical blow. The factory that had once been a hub of pride and energy now seemed like a ticking clock, counting down to an unknown end. The sound of the factory floor was different today. The clatter of machines, the hum of the assembly lines, it all seemed muted, as though even the machines knew something was wrong. Sarah forced herself to focus, pushing the anxiety to the back of her mind. She had a job to do, at least for now. But even as she worked, the thought of what was happening outside the factory walls loomed large. The uncertainty, the fear of the unknown, it was all becoming impossible to ignore. Her mind wandered back to the conversation with Tom the night before. He had tried to reassure her, but his words had only made her question the future even more. "You've got options," he had said. "You're good at what you do. If Ford goes down, there will be other places looking for talent like yours." Sarah had barely replied. The idea of leaving Ford, of leaving Detroit, seemed unthinkable. But Tom was right in one way. She had to be ready for whatever came next, whether that meant sticking it out at Ford or finding something new. It was then that a new voice interrupted her thoughts. "Hey, Sarah, got a minute?" It was Dave, the line supervisor. His face was tight, his eyes scanning the room as if making sure no one was eavesdropping. "Yeah, what's up?" Sarah asked, feeling her heart race. She had worked with Dave for years, but the look on his face wasn't comforting. "Look, I'm not supposed to say this, but word's getting out that Ford is cutting a significant chunk of the workforce. Management's been tight-lipped about it, but there's no denying it anymore. If things go south, we could be in real trouble, Dave said in a low voice, looking around again to make sure no one else was listening. Sarah's stomach churned. This was worse than she had imagined. The rumors weren't just rumors anymore, they were a reality creeping closer by the minute. She nodded grimly, her heart sinking. "I'll keep my head down," she replied, trying to sound calm, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Dave gave her a nod, then turned to leave. As Sarah watched him go, her mind was awash with the implications. Ford was about to make some hard decisions, and those decisions would have a ripple effect on everyone in Detroit. The question was, would Sarah be able to adapt to the changes, or would she find herself left behind, like so many others before her? The rising tension in the factory was impossible to ignore. She could feel it every day as more workers whispered about the cuts, the layoffs, the uncertainty that hovered just out of reach, like a dark cloud ready to burst. Sarah tried to push it out of her mind, but she couldn't. It was becoming clear, the world she had built, the world she had believed in, was beginning to unravel. And it was only going to get worse. The air in the Ford factory felt heavier the next day, as though the building itself was bracing for an inevitable storm. Sarah couldn't shake the sense of impending change. Every clank of metal on metal, every mechanical hum, every voice around her was suffused with an undercurrent of anxiety. The once familiar sounds of the factory had transformed into a chaotic symphony of uncertainty. As she walked the factory floor, her mind raced through all the possible outcomes. Would Ford really shut down? Would her job be gone? If that happened, what would she do? Would she follow Tom's suggestion and join Tesla? It seemed like an impossible leap, leaving everything she had worked for, abandoning the security she had found in Ford, just to start over in an entirely new company, a new environment, and a new industry. But then, as she glanced around at her co-workers, she knew she wasn't alone. There were hundreds of people here, men and women who had dedicated their lives to Ford, to the cars that built the city of Detroit. People who had made sacrifices for their families, people who had dreams of a better life. These were the people who would be affected by Ford's decision. Sarah wasn't just thinking about herself anymore, she was thinking about her co-workers, her friends, her community. They were all in this together. The clattering of tools interrupted Sarah's thoughts. She turned to see one of the newer hires, a young man named Jake, nervously wiping his hands on his work shirt. He was still in his 20s, but he had quickly become a solid worker, impressing the supervisors with his attention to detail and work ethic. Sarah had seen him around for the past few months, but they hadn't spoken much. Today, however, he looked anxious, almost like he was trying to keep his composure while everything inside him was falling apart. "You okay, Jake?" Sarah asked, walking over to him. He glanced up at her, his expression a mix of worry and frustration. "I don't know, Sarah. I keep hearing all these rumors. The layoffs. The closure. I don't know what I'm supposed to do." His voice cracked slightly, and Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. The fear was real. Sarah paused, her mind working quickly. She had always prided herself on being strong, on being the person others could lean on. She had always been the steady one, the one who helped others through tough times. But right now, even she wasn't sure where the next step would lead. "We all feel the same way, Jake," she said, trying to sound reassuring. "But we can't focus on the rumors. We have to keep doing our jobs, keep showing up. That's what we can control right now. The rest, we'll figure it out when we know more." Jake nodded, his face softening slightly. "Thanks, Sarah. I don't want to lose this job. It's everything." Sarah felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. For Jake, for so many of her co-workers, Ford wasn't just a job. It was security. It was their future. And that future was hanging in the balance. The rest of the day passed in a blur. As Sarah worked, her mind kept returning to the same question: what if this was it? What if Ford really was shutting down? Every time she tried to focus on the task at hand, the thought crept in, unbidden and insistent. Later that afternoon, during a brief break, Sarah pulled out her phone and saw a new notification from Tom. She hesitated before opening it, unsure if she was ready for more bad news. "I know things are tough, but if you're seriously thinking about moving to Tesla, now might be the time to do it. I can help you make the transition. Just think about it, okay?" Sarah stared at the message for a long time. Her heart pounded in her chest. Tom was offering a lifeline, a way out. But leaving Ford felt like betraying everything she had worked for: the pride she felt in the job, the loyalty to her colleagues, the connection to the city of Detroit. She had been a part of something bigger than herself here. But could she really stand by and watch it all slip away? As the day wore on, Sarah found herself losing focus. The hum of the factory seemed to blend together with the constant ringing in her ears, the sound of a future unraveling. At lunch, she sat with Karen, who, like her, was grappling with the same doubts. "I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending everything's okay," Karen admitted, her voice low. "Every day, it feels like we're walking a little closer to the edge. If Ford closes, where do we even go from here? What happens to us?" Sarah had no answer for her. The reality was too overwhelming to face. The uncertainty was suffocating. But as they finished their lunch and prepared to return to the floor, something inside Sarah shifted. She realized that, for the first time in a long while, she was no longer afraid of the unknown. Maybe it was the years of struggle and hardship that had taught her this, or maybe it was the slow-burning desire for something more. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let fear dictate her future. If Ford shut down, it would hurt. There was no denying that. But she had survived too many challenges to let this be the one that defined her. She would find a way. She would figure it out. With a renewed sense of purpose, Sarah looked around at her coworkers. They were all in this together, and as much as she was scared, she knew that unity was their greatest strength. If they had made it this far, they could make it through whatever came next. At that moment, the factory floor felt less like a prison and more like a battleground. And Sarah was ready to fight. She wasn't going to let Ford's fate dictate her own. But the storm was coming, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that it would take everything she had to weather it. The days that followed felt like a slow-motion crash. News of Ford's potential shutdown had spread like wildfire, and Sarah could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her every moment. As the whispers of layoffs, shutdowns, and factory closures grew louder, she began to lose her grip on the steady, predictable life she had once known. The factory, which had been her second home for years, now felt like a place of quiet resignation. There was no more chatter about new cars being built, no more hopeful talk of company expansion. It was all about survival, how long they had before the hammer fell, and who would be left standing when it did. Sarah had spent the previous night tossing and turning, her mind racing with all the worst-case scenarios. She knew she needed to keep her cool, but it felt harder each day. Even her conversations with Karen had started to feel strained, as if they were both too afraid to speak the truth. The truth that, despite all their efforts to hold on to the old ways, Ford might not survive this crisis. The emotional toll of the uncertainty began to take its toll on Sarah. She was on edge. Her usual ability to shut out distractions and focus on her work was slipping away. Every clank of machinery, every passing conversation about what-ifs, it all gnawed at her. It wasn't until that Wednesday afternoon that things came to a head. The announcement came down suddenly, without warning, an all-hands meeting that would take place at 2 p.m. Word spread like wildfire, and the factory floor buzzed with nervous energy. Sarah's heart raced as she walked with Karen to the meeting room, the tension in the air thick enough to choke on. "Do you think they're going to tell us something we don't already know?" Karen asked, her voice shaky as they found their seats in the crowded room. I don't know, Sarah replied, forcing a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. But it can't be good. If they wanted us to stay calm, they would have told us before. This is big. Sarah's mind spun with all the possibilities: layoffs, closures, a full shutdown of the U.S. production lines. Her stomach churned. For the first time, she allowed herself to think about what this would mean: losing her job, losing her place in the world. She had always prided herself on being independent, on having a steady job that supported her. But now, that security felt as fragile as a house of cards. The meeting started, and the room fell silent. At the front stood Dave, the line supervisor, his expression grave. I know these last few weeks have been full of uncertainty, he began, his voice tight. And I wish I could give you all more answers right now. But the reality is, we don't have all the answers ourselves. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had expected this. No one had the answers. The situation was just as murky for the management as it was for the workers. But hearing it aloud made it all the more real. Ford is facing a significant restructuring, Dave continued, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. The company is assessing its operations across the U.S., and there are likely going to be layoffs. We don't know the specifics yet, but we will be informed as soon as possible. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Layoffs. Sarah's heart raced as she looked around the room. Faces of worry, fear, and exhaustion were reflected back at her. Everyone was on edge, bracing themselves for what came next. We're all in this together, Dave added, his tone softer now. But right now, the only thing we can do is keep doing our jobs, showing up every day, and staying focused. That's all we can control. But Sarah knew it wasn't enough. Control was slipping away from her. It was slipping away from everyone in the room. The meeting wrapped up shortly after, with no concrete details about what would happen next. The workers filed out, each one quietly processing the news. Some muttered quietly to their colleagues, others simply walked away with their heads down. Sarah felt like she was walking in a fog, each step uncertain and heavy with dread. As she left the meeting room, she found herself alone in the hallway, staring at the dull concrete floor beneath her. For a long moment, she couldn't bring herself to move. It wasn't until she heard Karen's voice calling her name that she snapped out of her daze. Sarah, wait up. Karen's voice was shaky, and Sarah turned to find her standing at the end of the hallway, her eyes wide with anxiety. You okay? Sarah asked, walking toward her. Karen shook her head, her lips trembling. No. No, I'm not okay. I can't stop thinking about what happens next. I can't keep doing this. I feel like I'm losing everything. Sarah wanted to say something comforting, but the truth was, she felt the same way. It was like the floor had been yanked out from beneath them, and they were left to freefall into an unknown future. Nothing was stable anymore. The future that they had once taken for granted was now a place of anxiety and confusion. I don't know what to do either, Sarah admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. It feels like everything we've worked for is just gone. And I don't know if we can get it back. Tears filled Karen's eyes, and she quickly wiped them away. Sarah wanted to reach out, to comfort her friend, but she too was struggling to keep it together. What if this is the end? Karen whispered. What if everything we've worked for, all these years, it just disappears? In that moment, Sarah didn't have an answer. The uncertainty was too much, too overwhelming. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if Ford would survive, or if they would both be left behind, looking for new jobs in a city that was already struggling. But she did know one thing. As Sarah looked at her friend, her heart heavy with the same fears, she realized that, even in the face of the unknown, they still had each other. The factory might close. Their jobs might vanish. But they still had each other. And for now, that was enough to keep them going. "You're not alone, Karen," Sarah said, her voice stronger now, despite the uncertainty. "We'll get through this. Together." And in that moment, Sarah understood something deeper, that even in the darkest of times, it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something new. The following days after the announcement were marked by a strange kind of silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes with a calm and peace of mind, it was a silence full of uncertainty, fear, and the weight of an unresolved future. The factory had become a place of quiet resignation. People went about their work, but it was clear that no one was truly present. Their minds were elsewhere, wondering whether or not the next day would be their last, whether their jobs would survive the cut. For Sarah, the tension was almost unbearable. Every passing minute felt like an eternity. Yet, somehow, she managed to keep moving forward, going through the motions of her workday. She found herself trying to be the voice of calm for others, even though she was struggling just as much, if not more, than anyone else. She wasn't sure how much longer she could pretend to have it all together, but she knew that as long as she stayed strong for her coworkers, they would remain strong for her. She began to wonder if she was simply delaying the inevitable. If Ford shut down, what would her life look like? Would she be like so many others, scrambling to find another job in a city already facing so much hardship? Would she end up joining Tesla, as Tom had suggested, or would she try something completely different? It was on the fourth day after the meeting that Sarah received the call. It came just after her shift, as she was gathering her things to leave the factory. "Hello?" Sarah answered, glancing at the caller ID. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Sarah, it's Dave from the factory," came the voice on the other end. "I wanted to let you know that Ford has made a decision regarding the layoffs. They're going to start the process next week." Sarah's stomach twisted into a knot. She had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, she felt a wave of panic wash over her. Are we going to be laid off?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain calm. Dave hesitated for a moment. "It's complicated. Not everyone will be affected, but we don't know exactly who yet. The company is restructuring, but we won't know the full list until next week." Sarah felt a deep sense of dread settle over her. The uncertainty was unbearable. She didn't know if she was on the list or not, and the waiting was 1,000 times worse than knowing. But one thing was clear, everything was changing. The factory, her job, her entire life had been tied to Ford for so long, and now that was being threatened. She wasn't sure how to feel anymore. Was she angry? Relieved? Sad? All she knew was that her life was on the precipice of something huge, and there was no going back. Over the next few days, Sarah started to do what she had been avoiding, thinking about what might come next. She had always prided herself on her ability to solve problems, but this one felt bigger than anything she had faced before. If she lost her job at Ford, what was next? Would she go to Tesla like Tom had suggested? Would she stay in Detroit and try to rebuild, even if it meant starting from scratch? But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that it wasn't about whether she would find another job or not. It was about how she would handle it, how she would keep moving forward no matter what. There were no guarantees in life, no guarantees that everything would work out perfectly. But there was one thing Sarah had learned over the years: she couldn't give up. She couldn't let fear rule her life. And it wasn't just her own future she had to think about anymore. It was her friends and coworkers, too. As much as Sarah hated the uncertainty, she knew that they were all in this together. The factory might close, but that didn't mean their lives were over. They were stronger than that. They had always been stronger than that. That weekend, she spent hours going through job listings online, reaching out to contacts she had made over the years, asking for advice and recommendations. It was exhausting, but it was also liberating. It gave her something to focus on, something to control in the face of an uncontrollable situation. As she sat in her apartment later that evening, scrolling through job postings, she saw a message from Tom pop up on her phone. "I've been thinking about you, Sarah. I know this is tough, but if you decide to come over to Tesla, I can help you with the transition. You don't have to do it alone." For a moment, Sarah stared at the message, her heart pounding. She thought about it, really thought about it. Tesla was a new world for her, one she wasn't sure she was ready for. But it was an opportunity. It was a chance to start fresh, to move forward into a new era of technology, innovation, and change. Yet, the idea of leaving Ford, of leaving behind everything she had worked for, felt like stepping into the unknown. It felt like betrayal. But was it really? Was it wrong to chase a new dream, to seek a new path in life when the one you had been following was slipping through your fingers? She took a deep breath and typed out her response. "Thanks, Tom. I appreciate the offer. I'm still thinking it over. But I'll keep you in mind." As soon as she hit send, she leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. She didn't have all the answers yet. But she knew one thing, she wasn't done. Not yet. She wasn't going to let Ford's fate decide hers. A few days later, Sarah found herself standing in front of the factory doors once more. The news was in, Ford had begun its first wave of layoffs. The uncertainty was over, but the reality was much harder to swallow. Sarah wasn't among the first round of layoffs, but she knew her time at Ford was limited. It felt like the beginning of the end, and she was struggling to reconcile that with her own sense of identity. But then, in the midst of the chaos, Sarah saw something she hadn't noticed before. The workers, the people who had been there day in and day out, weren't giving up. They were still showing up. They were still doing their jobs, still pushing through the uncertainty, still standing together. It was in that moment that Sarah realized what she had to do, she had to keep moving forward. No matter what. No matter how hard it got. She wasn't going to be defined by this moment, by Ford's decisions, by the factory. She was going to define her future. And with that, Sarah made her choice. She would leave the factory, leave the security that had once been so comforting. She would start over, rebuild her life. It was time for a new chapter. With one final glance at the factory, Sarah walked out the door, ready to face whatever came next. The weeks that followed the announcement were a blur of endless meetings, emotional farewells, and sleepless nights. Sarah spent her days at the factory, working diligently, but her heart wasn't in it anymore. The uncertainty of the situation had drained her energy, leaving her in a constant state of anxious anticipation. She'd learned the hard way that no matter how hard she worked, how much effort she put into her job, things were out of her hands now. But despite the storm swirling around her, one thing remained certain: Sarah had never felt more determined to fight for her future. It wasn't just about the factory anymore. It was about her life, her future, and the decisions that lay ahead. The layoffs had come and gone in waves, and Sarah had dodged the bullet for the time being, but there were no guarantees. Every morning she woke up with a nagging sense of dread, wondering if this would be the day her name was on the list. It was exhausting, emotionally and physically, but Sarah kept pushing herself to keep going. For herself. For Karen. For all of them. One night, Sarah was sitting on her couch, scrolling through job boards, when her phone buzzed. It was a text from Karen. "Sarah, I think you should come with me tomorrow. We're going to that career fair downtown. It's a chance for us to start over. We can figure this out together." Sarah had been avoiding the idea of job hunting. She knew she needed to start looking for other opportunities, but it felt like admitting defeat. She had been with Ford for so long, and the idea of leaving it behind felt like a failure. But Karen's message hit something deep inside her. It was a lifeline, an invitation to take action rather than sit in uncertainty. She stared at the message for a long time. It wasn't easy to think about leaving Ford, but staying stagnant was worse. And if anyone understood the weight of the decision, it was Karen. They had been through so much together, and it was time to face this next step together as well. The next morning, Sarah met Karen at the career fair. The convention center was packed with people, all with the same sense of urgency in their eyes. It was like a sea of possibility, but also of desperation. Every person she passed was handing out resumes, trying to make connections, hoping that someone, somewhere, might give them a chance. The air was thick with hope and anxiety, a perfect reflection of how Sarah felt inside. "Ready for this?" Karen asked, trying to sound upbeat as they navigated the crowded hall. "As ready as I'll ever be," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. She hadn't realized how much she needed this until now, the chance to move forward, to take control of her future again. It was terrifying, but also thrilling. They spent the day at the fair, talking to recruiters, collecting business cards, and learning about potential opportunities. The reality of what was happening hit Sarah harder than she had anticipated. Every booth was another reminder of the future she wasn't sure about, but at the same time, every conversation was a small spark of hope. There were industries that were hiring, positions that needed people with her skills. She could see a future, even if it didn't involve Ford. By the end of the day, Sarah was exhausted but strangely energized. She had a stack of business cards and a renewed sense of purpose. There were options out there. There was hope. She wasn't defined by what was happening at Ford, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized that maybe this wasn't the end at all. Maybe it was the beginning. Later that evening, as she sat down for dinner with Karen, they shared their thoughts. Karen, too, had felt the weight of the day. She had always dreamed of moving on, finding something new. She just hadn't known where to start. "We have a chance, Sarah," Karen said, her voice quiet but filled with conviction. "This isn't the end of our story. It's just the start of something new." Sarah nodded, her eyes focused on the business cards scattered across the table. She was still afraid, still uncertain about what would come next. But Karen was right. This wasn't the end. This was the moment where everything changed. "We're not giving up, are we?" Sarah asked. "No," Karen replied with a smile. "We're not giving up. We're just getting started." The next few days were a whirlwind. Sarah found herself back at the factory, but she was no longer the same person who had walked in just a week earlier. The sense of dread had lifted. She had a plan. She had options. And with every passing day, she became more and more convinced that she could make it through this, no matter what. It wasn't easy. The factory was still on edge. There were still moments of uncertainty, still moments when she feared that the worst was coming. But now, instead of sitting idly by and waiting for it to happen, Sarah had a new sense of control. She was actively taking steps to secure her future. She had sent out resumes, followed up with contacts, and even started looking into further education. There were doors opening, and she was ready to walk through them. And then, just when she thought the storm might have passed, she got a call. It was from Tesla. "Hi, Sarah," a friendly voice greeted her. "This is Emily from Tesla. I wanted to let you know that after reviewing your resume and your interview, we'd like to move forward with you for the position of production supervisor. We think you'd be a great fit for our team." For a moment, Sarah couldn't breathe. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected to hear back so soon, and certainly not with an offer. Her heart raced in her chest, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Are you still interested in joining Tesla?" Emily asked, her voice warm and professional. Yes, I am," Sarah replied, her voice shaky with excitement. "I'm definitely interested." "We're excited to have you join us," Emily said, before going over the details of the position and the next steps. When the call ended, Sarah sat back in her chair, her hands trembling. She had done it. She had taken the leap, and it had paid off. She had a new job, a new future. It wasn't what she had expected, it wasn't Ford, it wasn't Detroit, but it was hers. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope. Later that night, she called Karen. "I got the job," Sarah said, the words still feeling unreal as she said them out loud. "That's amazing," Karen exclaimed. "I knew you could do it." Sarah laughed, her heart still racing. "I can't believe it. But it feels right. I feel like this is what I was meant to do." As she lay in bed that night, Sarah thought about everything she had gone through. The pain, the uncertainty, the fear. But also the strength, the perseverance, and the support of her friends. She had survived the storm, and now, she was ready for the calm that came with a new beginning. Ford might have been shutting down, but Sarah's journey was just beginning. The call from Tesla had been a pivotal moment, but the days that followed felt like a whirlwind of new opportunities and uncertainties. Sarah had accepted the offer, and now the next chapter of her life was unfolding before her. But even as she packed her things, prepared to leave the factory she had called home for years, there was a bittersweetness in her heart. She had spent countless hours at Ford, pouring her time, energy, and passion into a job that had provided stability. It wasn't perfect, but it had been familiar. The people, the routine, the smell of oil and metal, it had all been a part of her life. And now, she was leaving all of that behind. As she walked through the factory on her last day, she paused by the assembly line. The machines were still whirring, the workers still moving in synchrony, but something felt different. It was a goodbye that she wasn't ready for, but one she knew was inevitable. Sarah had made peace with it, but it didn't make it any easier. "I'll miss you," she whispered, almost to herself. Tom appeared behind her, his footsteps quiet on the factory floor. He had always been there, a constant in the storm of uncertainty. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice low but concerned. Sarah nodded, glancing at him. "Yeah. I think it's time. I've got to move on, Tom. It's not just about the job, it's about me finding my path, you know. I can't keep waiting for things to change. I've got to make my own changes." Tom smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "I get it. I really do. But, you know, if it doesn't work out, you've always got a place here." Sarah smiled back, but there was an edge of finality in her expression. "Thanks, Tom. But this is the right move for me. It's time to move forward." They shared one last handshake, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had been through together, and then Sarah turned away, walking out of the factory doors for the last time. Her first day at Tesla felt like stepping into a new world. The facility was nothing like Ford. It was sleek, modern, and full of energy. The air was electric with excitement, not just about the products they were creating, but about the vision that Tesla embodied. There was a sense of purpose in the air that Sarah had never felt at Ford. It was as if every person there believed in something bigger than themselves, something world-changing. As Sarah walked through the massive factory floor, she couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The machinery was state-of-the-art, the assembly lines were clean and efficient, and everywhere she looked, there were people who seemed passionate about what they were doing. It was a stark contrast to the factory she had left behind. This was a place where innovation was not just a buzzword but a way of life. "Welcome to Tesla." Emily, her new supervisor, greeted her warmly as Sarah stepped into the break room. "I'm so glad you're here. I've heard a lot of good things about you." "Thanks," Sarah replied, a bit overwhelmed. "I'm excited to be here. We're all about pushing the envelope here," Emily continued, smiling. "You'll fit right in. But first, let's get you settled in and introduce you to the team." As they walked through the facility, Sarah's nerves started to settle. The people at Tesla were different from what she was used to at Ford. They were younger, more dynamic, and there was a palpable sense of excitement. The company's mission, to create sustainable energy solutions and revolutionize the automotive industry, was inspiring. Sarah could feel herself being drawn in, her curiosity piqued by the bold vision. By the time lunch rolled around, Sarah had met several key members of the team and was beginning to understand the scope of what Tesla was all about. It was a company driven by innovation, but also by a sense of community and shared purpose. They weren't just building cars, they were building a future. That afternoon, Sarah was given her first task, to oversee a new production line that was being introduced for a new electric vehicle model. It wasn't an easy task. The technology was cutting edge, and the pressure was high to deliver results quickly. But Sarah was used to pressure. She had managed production lines at Ford for years, and though this was different, she was confident in her abilities. As she stood in front of the production line, watching the workers as they moved in harmony, Sarah felt a surge of pride. This was what she had been looking for. This was the kind of work that made her feel like she was making a difference. It wasn't just about meeting quotas or producing cars, it was about being part of something that mattered. Over the next few weeks, Sarah settled into her new role at Tesla. Every day brought new challenges, but with each challenge, she found herself growing more confident. She had a team that respected her leadership, and she quickly earned their trust. They were working together, not just to build cars, but to build a future. She found herself spending late nights at the facility, reviewing production schedules and analyzing data. There was a level of intensity at Tesla that she had never experienced before. But it was a good kind of intensity. The kind that pushed her to be better, to think bigger. And then one evening, as Sarah was reviewing some reports in her office, Emily came in with a smile on her face. "We've been getting great feedback from the higher-ups about the production line," Emily said, clearly pleased. "They're impressed with how smoothly things are running. They want you to present the numbers at the next meeting." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Really? That's great. I'm honored." Emily nodded. "You've earned it. You're doing amazing work, Sarah." Sarah's pulse quickened as she thought about the presentation. It was a big deal. This could be the moment that solidified her place at Tesla. It was her chance to prove to herself, and to everyone else, that she was capable of more than just making it through tough times. She could thrive. She could excel. The night before the presentation, Sarah lay in bed, her mind racing with thoughts. She had worked hard to get here, and now it was time to show everyone what she was capable of. She wasn't the same person who had walked out of Ford's factory doors just a few weeks ago. She was someone stronger, someone who had faced uncertainty and come out on the other side, ready to take on whatever came next. The next morning, Sarah stood in front of the conference room, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was filled with executives, engineers, and the entire production team. It was an intimidating group, but Sarah took a deep breath and started her presentation. As she spoke, she saw the reactions of her audience, nods of approval, thoughtful expressions, and the occasional glance of admiration. She spoke with confidence, knowing that she was presenting not just numbers, but the results of her hard work, her dedication, and her belief in what they were all trying to achieve. By the time she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. And then, one by one, the executives began to applaud. "We're impressed, Sarah," one of them said with a smile. "You've done an excellent job." Sarah's heart swelled with pride. She had done it. She had proven herself. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. Sarah's second month at Tesla felt like a constant balancing act. She was finally starting to settle into her new role, but with that comfort came new challenges, challenges that tested not just her professional abilities but her personal resilience as well. Her days were long and demanding. As the supervisor of the new production line, she was constantly making decisions that affected everything from the timing of deliveries to the quality of each unit that came off the line. It was the kind of high-stakes environment Sarah had always thrived in, but it was also an environment that could feel like a pressure cooker at times. At Ford, she had learned to manage crises and keep things running smoothly, but Tesla was a different animal. The expectations were higher, the pace faster, and the technology more complex. It wasn't just about managing a line, it was about pushing boundaries, thinking outside the box, and finding new ways to innovate and improve. One afternoon, Sarah was reviewing a production report when she noticed something concerning. A particular component of the electric vehicle was consistently falling short of the quality standards. It wasn't a huge issue yet, but if it wasn't addressed soon, it could lead to delays, cost overruns, and potentially, a recall. It was a problem she couldn't ignore. She immediately gathered her team for an emergency meeting. "We've got a problem with the battery housing," she told them, her voice steady but urgent. "The measurements are off, and it's affecting our quality control. We need to fix this, and we need to fix it fast." The room was filled with silence for a moment before one of the engineers, Tim, spoke up. "We've been noticing a slight issue with the calibration on the production machines, but we didn't think it was this bad." Sarah nodded. "We need to isolate the problem and come up with a solution, and we need to do it quickly. Let's meet with the tech team and get to work." The team worked through the issue for hours, breaking down the problem into smaller pieces and testing different solutions. It was exhausting work, but Sarah could see the determination in her team's eyes. They weren't just doing it because it was their job, they were doing it because they believed in what they were building. There was a shared sense of purpose that made even the most tedious tasks feel meaningful. By the time they found the solution, adjusting the calibration software for the machines, it was late into the night. Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her as the production line began running smoothly again. But as she sat down to take a moment for herself, she realized how much more was riding on this job than she had initially anticipated. It wasn't just about meeting deadlines or keeping the line running efficiently. It was about proving to herself, to her team, and to everyone at Tesla that she could handle the pressure. The challenges were inevitable, but Sarah knew she had what it took to meet them head-on. That weekend, Sarah found herself at home for the first time in weeks. She had barely had a chance to catch her breath between meetings, late-night shifts, and urgent problem-solving. It felt good to have a moment of peace, even if it was fleeting. She picked up her phone and saw several missed calls from Karen. They hadn't had much time to talk lately, but Sarah had always relied on Karen for support. Her friend had been with her through thick and thin, through the layoffs, the factory closures, and the uncertainty of the past few months. She needed to talk to her, to hear a familiar voice. "Hey, Karen," Sarah said when she called back. "Sarah. It's been too long. How are you doing?" Sarah smiled, feeling the weight lift slightly at the sound of Karen's voice. "I'm doing okay. It's been a crazy few weeks, but I think I'm starting to get the hang of things here. It's just, a lot." Karen chuckled. "I can only imagine. I saw the news about Ford. It's getting worse, huh?" Sarah sighed. "Yeah. They're closing more plants, laying off more people. I still can't believe everything that's happening." "I'm sorry," Karen said softly. "But you're doing what you need to do. And I'm proud of you for making that leap." "Thanks, Karen," Sarah replied, her voice filled with gratitude. "I needed to hear that." There was a brief pause before Karen spoke again. "Have you thought more about your future? I mean, beyond Tesla. What do you want?" The question caught Sarah off guard. For weeks, she had been so focused on surviving at Tesla that she hadn't really thought about where it might lead. It was easy to get caught up in the daily grind, the deadlines, the meetings, the never-ending cycle of work. But Karen's question was a reminder that there was more to life than just work. There was a future to build, a path to carve. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "I'm so focused on doing my job well right now, I haven't had time to think about what comes next. But I guess. I don't know if I want to be in production forever. Maybe I want something more, something that challenges me differently." Karen's voice softened. "Sarah, you've always been good at leading people. Maybe it's time to think about where you can make the most impact." Maybe you're meant to be doing more than just keeping the wheels turning. You've got the skills, it's time to think about how you can really use them. Sarah sat quietly, mulling over Karen's words. She had always been so focused on the day-to-day challenges that she hadn't allowed herself to think about the bigger picture. But Karen was right. There was more out there for her. And maybe it was time to find out what that more looked like. Monday morning came quickly, and as Sarah stepped into Tesla's state-of-the-art conference room for another week of meetings, she found herself looking at things with a new perspective. The excitement of her new role hadn't worn off, but now, the challenges she faced seemed to offer a new kind of opportunity. Her team had been facing some unexpected setbacks in production, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, Sarah found herself thinking about solutions. Maybe it was time to step up and show her team a new way of thinking. A way to not just solve problems, but to innovate on a higher level. As the meeting began, Sarah felt a surge of confidence. She had earned her place at Tesla, but now it was time to prove she could do even more. The pressure wasn't going anywhere, but she was beginning to realize that the challenges were exactly what she needed to grow. And for the first time since she had walked away from Ford, Sarah felt truly in control of her future. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The weeks at Tesla seemed to blur together, a continuous cycle of high stakes, new challenges, and relentless problem solving. But as Sarah became more comfortable in her role, something began to stir inside her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. She felt like she was ready for more. She had already proven herself as a skilled manager, but now she wanted to prove that she could take on something bigger, something that would push her not just as a professional, but as a leader. It started with a meeting that Sarah wasn't expecting. She had just finished a long day in the factory, reviewing production schedules and troubleshooting a few technical issues, when she was called into a meeting with Emily and some of the higher-ups. When she walked into the conference room, her heart rate spiked. "Sarah," Emily said with a smile, "thank you for coming. We wanted to talk to you about something important." Sarah sat down, a little nervous, but trying to maintain her calm. "What's going on?" "We've been keeping an eye on your work, and I have to say, we're impressed," Emily began. "You've handled the production line issues with great efficiency, and your team speaks highly of your leadership. So, we've been thinking that it might be time for you to take on a bigger role." Sarah blinked, surprised. "A bigger role?" she repeated, unsure if she had heard her correctly. "Yes," the senior executive, Michael, chimed in. "We've got a new project coming up, a more strategic initiative, and we need someone who can take charge of both the operational and strategic sides of things. We believe you're ready for this." Sarah's pulse quickened. A new project? Strategic initiative? This was exactly the kind of opportunity she had been waiting for. "Tell me more," Sarah said, leaning forward, her interest piqued. The team explained that Tesla was planning to expand its electric vehicle production to meet increasing demand, and as part of that plan, they were looking for a leader to oversee a more complex integration between production and new technological developments. The role would require more than just managing a production line. It would involve working closely with the R&D team to ensure that Tesla's innovation matched its production capabilities. They wanted someone who could bridge the gap between cutting-edge technology and operational execution. "You'd be overseeing multiple production lines and working with the teams in engineering and design to ensure everything aligns," Emily said. "It's a big step, but we think you're the right person for it." Sarah's mind raced. It was the perfect opportunity, one that would challenge her in new ways. This was what she had been waiting for, a chance to make a true impact, not just in operations, but in shaping the future of Tesla's production strategy. "I'm honored," Sarah said, feeling a rush of gratitude. "But, it sounds like a big challenge. What exactly would my responsibilities be?" "You'd be the key point of contact between engineering, production, and the senior leadership team," Michael explained. You'll be responsible for ensuring that the new vehicle lines, and the associated technologies, are produced efficiently and on schedule. It's a leadership role that requires both a strategic mindset and a deep understanding of production processes. It's a chance to influence the entire production strategy at Tesla. Sarah took a deep breath. The pressure was intense, but it was also invigorating. This was what she had wanted when she first made the leap from Ford. She didn't want to be just another cog in the machine. She wanted to be the one driving the machine forward. That sounds amazing, Sarah said, her voice steady but excited. I'd love to take on this challenge. Emily and Michael exchanged a glance, clearly pleased. Great. We're confident you'll do well, Emily said. We'll start you on the new project next week. You'll have a team to help you, and we'll provide support as you transition. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, briefings, and preparation. Sarah quickly realized just how much responsibility she was about to take on. The new initiative wasn't just about overseeing a production line. It was about coordinating multiple departments, aligning production timelines with the research and development team, and ensuring that new technologies could be effectively integrated into the manufacturing process. There were meetings with engineers, meetings with product designers, and endless discussions about timelines and budgets. It was all a lot to digest. One evening, as Sarah sat at her desk, reviewing some technical documentation, she found herself feeling overwhelmed for the first time in a while. There were so many moving parts, so many things she needed to learn, so many people to keep in the loop. The pressure was mounting, and for a moment, she questioned if she was ready for all of this. But then she remembered something that Karen had told her during their conversation a few weeks ago: you're more than just a production manager, Sarah. You've got the skills to lead in ways you can't even imagine yet. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. She had always been someone who thrived under pressure. The challenges she had faced so far were nothing compared to what she had already overcome in her career. If she could survive the turmoil of Ford's shutdown, she could handle anything. It was time to prove that to herself. The next morning, Sarah stood before her new team for the first time. She had been assigned a diverse group of engineers, designers, and production specialists, each one highly skilled in their respective fields. As she looked around the room, she felt a rush of excitement mixed with the reality of what she had just stepped into. These people weren't just co-workers, they were the key to her success, and to the success of the entire project. Good morning, everyone, Sarah said, standing at the front of the room. I'm Sarah, and I'll be leading this project moving forward. I'm excited to be working with all of you. This is a big task we're taking on, but I believe that if we work together, we can achieve something incredible. I'm here to support you, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure we succeed. Her words were met with nods of agreement and some friendly smiles. It was clear that the team was ready to get started, but Sarah knew that leading them wasn't going to be easy. This role required a delicate balance of strategy, technical knowledge, and strong communication. But she was determined to make it work. As the meeting progressed, Sarah listened closely to each team member's concerns and suggestions. She made mental notes of what needed to be addressed and how to move forward. By the time the meeting wrapped up, Sarah had a clear sense of where to start, and what obstacles lay ahead. In the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into her new role with the same energy and determination she had brought to every other challenge in her career. She met with the R&D team to understand the latest technological developments and worked closely with engineers to integrate them into production processes. Every decision she made was scrutinized by senior leadership, and every change she implemented required the careful coordination of multiple teams. But despite the pressure, Sarah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She was no longer just responding to problems, she was shaping the future of Tesla's production strategy. She had gone from managing one production line to overseeing a company-wide initiative that would push Tesla to new heights. As she looked back on the journey that had brought her here, from the uncertainty of Ford's shutdown to this moment, Sarah realized something important: she had found her purpose. It wasn't just about making cars. It was about leading innovation, challenging the status quo, and leaving her mark on the world. And as the days passed, she grew more confident in her ability to do just that. As Sarah settled further into her new role, the intensity of the work only grew. The team was pushing hard to integrate the latest cutting-edge technologies into Tesla's production lines, and every day felt like a test of her leadership, decision-making, and ability to manage the pressure. There were moments when Sarah could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing on her shoulders, but she knew that she couldn't afford to show any signs of weakness. Not now, not after everything she had fought for. One afternoon, as she sat in a conference room with the senior leadership team, reviewing progress on the new project, a major issue emerged. A technological breakthrough that had promised to revolutionize the production process had hit a roadblock. The software that was supposed to optimize the production line had developed bugs that no one had anticipated. The system was malfunctioning, and unless they could fix it soon, they risked a major delay in production. The timelines were already tight, and any setback now would cause a ripple effect that could undermine the entire project. "Sarah, we need this fixed, and fast," Michael, the senior executive, said, his voice sharp with urgency. "The bugs in the software are threatening to throw everything off track. What's your plan?" Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. She had worked closely with the tech team on this, and she knew the gravity of the situation. If the issue couldn't be resolved in the next few days, it could cost Tesla millions in lost revenue and damage the company's reputation as an innovation leader. But there was more at stake now than just money. This project was a critical part of Tesla's long-term strategy to dominate the electric vehicle market, and if she couldn't fix it, it would undermine everything she had worked for. "I'm meeting with the tech team again tomorrow morning," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We'll isolate the problem and work on a fix. But I need everyone's full support to make this happen." Michael nodded but didn't seem reassured. "We're all counting on you, Sarah." The next morning, Sarah was up before dawn, reviewing the technical documentation and notes from the previous meetings. She had to understand every detail of the system to troubleshoot the problem effectively. Her mind raced as she pieced together what she knew, analyzing the failure from every angle. It was a complex issue, but Sarah knew that the only way to succeed was to break it down into manageable parts. By the time she arrived at Tesla's main campus, she was already in full problem-solving mode. She met with the tech team, who were just as anxious as she was. The mood in the room was tense, the air thick with a sense of urgency. "We've isolated the bug to the calibration system," one of the lead engineers, David, said. "The issue lies in the algorithm that controls the production flow. It's misinterpreting data from the sensors, causing a cascade of errors." Sarah nodded, taking in the information. "So, we need to recalibrate the algorithm and test it across the entire production system. Do we have the resources to do that in time?" David hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "It's going to take a full day of testing and tweaking the code. We can do it, but it'll be tight." Sarah glanced at the clock. Every minute counted. "All right, let's do it. I'll notify the rest of the team and make sure we have all the hands we need. Let's not waste any time." For the next 48 hours, Sarah and her team were immersed in fixing the software bugs. The entire factory floor was buzzing with activity, with engineers coding frantically, production lines grinding to a halt as systems were adjusted, and Sarah overseeing every decision. She barely slept, keeping a close eye on the progress while also managing the logistics of other aspects of the project. It felt like every second was critical, and every second felt like a battle to ensure Tesla's future was secure. As the clock ticked down, Sarah couldn't shake the mounting pressure. She wasn't just working on a project anymore. She was carrying the weight of Tesla's reputation, her team's success, and her own career. There were moments when she found herself doubting whether she could pull it off. The task seemed insurmountable. But then she remembered why she had come to Tesla in the first place. It was the same reason she had jumped into the unknown when Ford had started to crumble. She had chosen this path because she knew that, sometimes, the most difficult challenges led to the greatest rewards. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the tech team reported that the bugs had been fixed. The calibration algorithm was now functioning correctly, and the production line was up and running again. The relief in the room was palpable. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the first vehicle roll off the line after the adjustments. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. "We did it," Sarah said, exhaling deeply. "This is a win, team. Let's keep pushing forward." Despite the success, Sarah couldn't ignore the sense of unease that lingered. Even as she celebrated the resolution of the immediate problem, she found herself questioning if she was really cut out for this. She had put everything she had into the project, sacrificing sleep, time with family, and her own well-being. But the truth was, the success felt hollow. The adrenaline had gotten her through the tough moments, but deep down, she knew something was missing. She hadn't had time to consider what that something was until she received an unexpected call from Karen. "Hey, Sarah, it's been a while. How's everything going?" Karen's voice came through the phone, calm and familiar, a stark contrast to the chaos Sarah had been living in. "It's been intense," Sarah said with a tired laugh. "I think we've finally resolved the issue with the production software, but I can't shake this feeling that I'm missing something." Karen was quiet for a moment before she spoke. "You know, Sarah, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. You've accomplished so much at Tesla, but I'm hearing a lot of stress in your voice. Are you happy?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Sarah had been so focused on proving herself, on fixing problems and managing projects, that she hadn't stopped to ask herself that question. Am I happy? She hadn't even realized it, but the truth was that she wasn't. There was a sense of fulfillment in her work, yes, but it came at the cost of her peace of mind. The long hours, the stress, the constant push to deliver, it had all taken a toll on her. "I don't know, Karen," Sarah admitted, her voice quiet. "I've been so caught up in proving myself that I don't know if I even remember what it feels like to be happy anymore." Karen's voice softened. "Maybe it's time to take a step back, Sarah. You don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders all the time. It's okay to pause, to figure out what truly matters to you." Sarah sat in silence, contemplating her friend's words. Was she truly happy? And if not, what did she need to do to change that? The call with Karen lingered in Sarah's mind long after they hung up. What Karen had said echoed in her thoughts, over and over. "Maybe it's time to take a step back, Sarah." The idea of taking a break, stepping away from the relentless pace of Tesla's operations, felt almost foreign to her. Ever since she'd left Ford, she had thrown herself into work, determined to prove herself in a way that few could. But now, for the first time, she wondered if that drive was blinding her to something more important, her own well-being. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself struggling with the weight of the question Karen had posed. She wasn't sure what the right answer was, but she knew that the pressure was beginning to wear on her. Every day seemed like a battle, and she had started to feel like a soldier in a never-ending war. She would wake up every morning with a sense of urgency, her mind immediately rushing through the list of tasks she needed to accomplish. It had become a routine. But now, it felt like a never-ending cycle, one that wasn't bringing her the satisfaction she had hoped for. She had already proven that she could handle a leadership role in a high-pressure environment. She had navigated the complexities of Tesla's production, brought new technologies into the fold, and helped the company avoid a major disaster with the software bug. She was succeeding professionally, but at what cost? One evening, after a particularly exhausting day in meetings and factory tours, Sarah stood in her apartment, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She looked tired, not just physically, but emotionally drained. Her face had the same confident expression she had always worn, but deep down, she knew that something was off. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first arrived at Tesla. The joy and spark that once drove her had been replaced with a sense of monotony. She picked up her phone and dialed Karen's number. "Hey, Sarah, how's it going?" Karen answered after a couple of rings, her tone warm and familiar. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, her voice hesitant. "About what you said the other day. You were right. I don't know what it is, but something feels off. I don't feel happy, I guess. And I don't know if I should keep pushing through it or take a break." Karen was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could almost hear her thinking. "Sarah," Karen finally said, "you've been running at full speed for so long. It's okay to hit the pause button. You don't have to have everything figured out right now. Maybe stepping back for a bit could help you see things more clearly." Sarah ran a hand through her hair, considering the idea. "But what if I fall behind? What if this opportunity slips away because I take a break?" "Sometimes," Karen said, "you have to step away to come back stronger. Maybe you need to rediscover what you're really passionate about. It's not just about being busy or constantly achieving. It's about doing something that makes you feel fulfilled." Sarah let out a slow breath, considering Karen's words. The fear of falling behind, of losing momentum, had always been a constant companion. She had been trained to believe that success was tied to constant progress, but Karen was offering a different perspective. Maybe it was time to let go of that fear and embrace a new kind of growth, one that wasn't just about professional achievement. The next morning, Sarah made a decision. She would take a step back, even if only for a brief time. She needed to reevaluate what she wanted from her career and life. She wasn't sure what that would look like yet, but the first step was clear: she needed to give herself permission to pause. The following week, Sarah took a leave of absence from Tesla. It wasn't an easy decision. She felt a pang of guilt as she handed in her resignation for the time being, but she knew it was necessary. She spent the first few days doing nothing work-related, just allowing herself to breathe. She went for long walks in the park, met up with friends, and spent time reflecting on her career and life. It felt strange at first, to not have a constant stream of tasks and responsibilities crowding her mind, but after a while, she began to feel a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. In the quiet moments, Sarah realized that she had been so focused on achieving success for the sake of success that she had lost touch with the things that truly mattered to her. She had always believed that her worth was defined by her career, by how much she could accomplish and how quickly she could climb the ladder. But now, she saw that there were other things in life that were just as important: her health, her relationships, her happiness. Her phone buzzed one afternoon with a message from Emily at Tesla. "We miss having you around, Sarah. How's everything going? Any thoughts on coming back yet?" Sarah stared at the message for a long moment. The question felt loaded. She had been so focused on the hustle and bustle of the job that she hadn't allowed herself to consider what was best for her. Was coming back the right thing to do? Would returning to the grind just put her back into the same cycle of stress? She typed a response and hit send before she had time to second-guess herself. "I'm taking some time to think things over. I'll let you know when I'm ready to talk about next steps." After sending the message, Sarah sat back on her couch and closed her eyes. It felt like a weight had been lifted from her chest. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she was finally starting to listen to herself, to what she truly needed, not just what others expected of her. Over the next few weeks, Sarah explored different options. She met with a career coach who helped her uncover new goals and aspirations. She took up yoga, something she had always wanted to try but never had the time for. She even signed up for a few online courses in subjects she had been curious about for years, from philosophy to creative writing. It wasn't that she had lost her passion for innovation and leadership, but she realized that her identity was more than just her job title. As Sarah took this time for self-reflection, she began to realize that her work didn't have to define her. She could still contribute to the world, still make a difference, but she didn't have to sacrifice her personal happiness in the process. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a sense of excitement about the unknown. The days following Sarah's decision to take a leave from Tesla felt surreal. It was as though the world had slowed down, allowing her to breathe deeply for the first time in what felt like forever. No emails to answer, no conference calls to attend, no endless meetings that would blur into one another. It was just Sarah, alone with her thoughts and the quiet hum of the world outside her apartment window. Initially, she had felt guilty for stepping away. The weight of responsibility was something she had always carried with pride, and the idea of leaving Tesla, even temporarily, made her question if she was throwing away everything she had worked so hard to build. But each passing day made her more convinced that she had made the right choice. The question Karen had posed to her, "Are you happy?" continued to echo in her mind, and Sarah was finally allowing herself to answer it honestly. She wasn't happy, at least not in the way she had imagined happiness would come. She had focused so much on the pursuit of success that she had neglected the things that truly brought her joy. In her quest to climb the corporate ladder, she had lost sight of the simple pleasures that made life worth living. She had neglected her relationships, her hobbies, and most importantly, herself. And now, in the quiet of her time off, she was beginning to rediscover those things. One of the first things Sarah did was reconnect with her old friend, Lily. They hadn't seen each other in months, and the two of them had once shared long afternoons filled with conversations about everything and anything, life, love, dreams. Sarah realized how much she had missed those simple, carefree moments. Lily had always been a grounding presence in Sarah's life, the person who reminded her to slow down and enjoy the little things. Their lunch was at a small cafe by the water, where they reminisced about their time at college, catching up on everything from relationships to the latest book Lily had read. "You look different," Lily said with a thoughtful smile as they sat down at the table. "I can't quite put my finger on it." "You're glowing, Sarah. What's going on?" Sarah smiled, a little sheepish. "I took some time off from work. Decided to take a step back from the craziness and figure things out." Lily's eyes widened. "Wait, really? I thought you were all in at Tesla." "I was," Sarah admitted, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "But I think I've been chasing something that isn't really mine to chase anymore. I've been so wrapped up in proving myself to everyone else that I forgot what it is that I actually want. What I need." Lily nodded, her face soft with understanding. "That's a big realization, Sarah. It takes guts to step away when everything feels like it's on the line. But sometimes we need to step out of the rush to see what's important." "I don't know what's next," Sarah confessed, her voice a little quieter. "But I know I need something different. I'm not sure what that is yet." Lily reached across the table, placing her hand gently over Sarah's. "That's okay. You don't need to have it all figured out right now. You just need to figure out what makes you happy. Life isn't a race." The simplicity of those words hit Sarah harder than she expected. Life wasn't a race. She had been running without taking the time to enjoy the journey. Lily's reminder to slow down was like a light bulb flicking on in her mind. After their lunch, Sarah spent the next few days giving herself permission to be present. She went for long walks in the city, letting her mind wander freely as she observed the world around her. The cool breeze, the sound of children laughing, the way the leaves rustled in the trees, all of it was so simple, yet it felt incredibly refreshing. One morning, as she sat in a park near her apartment, she realized she had been so consumed with work that she had forgotten what it felt like to just be. There was a deep peace in the stillness of the moment. She pulled out her notebook and began to write, not with any particular goal in mind but just to express whatever was on her heart. The words flowed easily. "I've spent so much of my life chasing something that wasn't truly mine. I thought that success would bring me happiness, but it's been the opposite. I've forgotten who I am beyond my job title, beyond the responsibilities I carry. It's time to rediscover myself, to slow down and listen to what my heart really wants." The act of writing felt cathartic, as though she was peeling back layers of herself she hadn't known existed. She paused and reread the words she'd written. Rediscover myself. It sounded so simple, yet it was so profound. This was her next step, not in terms of career, but in terms of who she was as a person. As Sarah's days became a blend of peaceful reflection and exploration, she took up old hobbies she had once loved. She spent afternoons painting, an art form she had neglected when she got too busy with work. The process was slow but soothing, and each brushstroke seemed to allow Sarah to reconnect with herself in a way she hadn't in years. One evening, after a particularly fulfilling day spent with friends and in her art studio, Sarah sat back in her chair, exhausted but content. She looked at her painting. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. It was hers, and that was enough. Sarah's rediscovery wasn't just about finding time for relaxation or hobbies, it was about reconnecting with her core. She began to reflect on what truly mattered to her, beyond the pressures of the corporate world. Her passion for innovation and leadership had always been there, but now she was starting to realize that they could coexist with a fulfilling, balanced life. She didn't have to choose between career success and personal happiness, she could have both, but it would require a shift in how she approached her goals. One afternoon, Sarah was meeting with her career coach again, this time in a quiet cafe. The last time they had met, Sarah had been in a state of crisis, unsure of her next move. But now, she felt calmer, more centered, and ready to tackle the question of what came next. "I've spent the last few weeks really thinking," Sarah began, her voice steadier than it had been in months. "And I realized that I don't have to burn myself out to be successful. I can still lead, still make a difference, but it doesn't have to come at the cost of my well-being." Her career coach nodded approvingly. "That's an important insight, Sarah. It's easy to think that success means sacrificing everything else, but true success comes from alignment, when what you're doing is in sync with who you are and what makes you happy." Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile she had had in a long time. "I'm ready for the next chapter, but this time, I'm doing it for me." As Sarah's time off continued, she found herself at a crossroads, not just in her career, but in how she viewed her role in the world. The clarity she had gained through her time of reflection was slowly reshaping her priorities. Her need for constant achievement had driven her to the edge, but now she saw that success wasn't just about personal accomplishments. It was about creating a life that felt right, one where her professional ambitions and personal well-being could exist in harmony. She had spent years in the fast lane, constantly moving from one task to the next, but now, she found herself savoring the slower pace of life. Each moment felt like a breath of fresh air. She spent time meditating, journaling, and revisiting old hobbies. The world outside had once been a blur of deadlines and meetings, but now, she felt as though she was finally able to see it in full color. One afternoon, Sarah took a walk through a local park, where children were playing, and the sun filtered through the leaves of the trees, casting long, dappled shadows on the ground. As she strolled, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She was no longer rushing to get somewhere. She was just being. It was then that she received a message that would change everything. "Hey Sarah, it's Elon. Hope you're doing well. I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation and wanted to catch up. Let me know when you're free." Sarah stared at the message for a long moment. Elon Musk. The name alone was enough to make her heart race. It was strange to think that someone as influential as Elon would be reaching out to her. In the time since she had left Ford, she had often reflected on her brief but impactful interactions with him, but now, with everything that had happened in her life, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness about what he might want. She responded quickly, arranging a time for a video call. As she waited for the call to start, her mind raced through 100 possibilities. Why was Elon reaching out to her now? Was he offering her a new role, or was this just a casual check-in? The uncertainty only made the moment more intense. When the call finally connected, Elon appeared on the screen, his face filled with a familiar intensity but also warmth. "Hey Sarah, how's it going?" he asked, his voice casual but focused. "I'm doing well," Sarah replied, feeling a little out of her element. "Thanks for reaching out. What's on your mind?" Elon leaned forward slightly, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "I've been thinking about what you're doing now, taking a break, reflecting. I think it's great. But here's the thing. Tesla needs someone with your skills and insight. We've been facing some challenges, and I think you're the perfect person to help us navigate through them. It's not about going back to the grind. It's about stepping into a role where you can lead with the experience you've gained, but without sacrificing the balance you've been seeking." Sarah blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Was Elon Musk suggesting that she return to Tesla? After everything she had been through? "I'm not sure," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "I'm in a different place now. I've been doing a lot of soul-searching. I don't want to fall back into the same patterns that led me to burn out in the first place. I need to make sure that whatever I do next aligns with the person I'm becoming, not just the person I was." Elon nodded, understanding in his gaze. "I get that. That's actually why I think this could be the perfect opportunity for you. It's not about more work or more pressure, it's about creating something sustainable. I believe we need leaders who understand that balance. People who aren't just chasing the next big thing but are also focused on the long-term impact. What I'm suggesting is that you take on a role that allows you to help guide Tesla in a direction that prioritizes people, innovation, and sustainability, both for the company and for its people." For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a sense of clarity about her future. It wasn't just about returning to Tesla or making a bold career move. It was about creating something that mattered, for herself and for the world around her. Elon wasn't asking her to go back to the way things were. He was asking her to help shape the future, to create something better. She paused, taking a deep breath. "I'm intrigued," she said finally. "But I need some time to think about it. I want to make sure that this is the right move for me, that it's not just about the challenge, but about building something meaningful." Elon smiled, as though he had anticipated her answer. "Take all the time you need, Sarah. I'm not going anywhere. But when you're ready, the door is open." As the call ended, Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She had always known that the opportunity to work with Elon Musk again could change everything. But now, for the first time, she felt like she was in control of her own destiny. The choice wasn't about fitting into someone else's mold, it was about defining what success meant for her. The next few days were filled with more reflection. Sarah spent long hours considering Elon's offer. The temptation to return to Tesla was strong. After all, she had a deep connection to the company and its mission. But this time, she wasn't motivated by the need to prove herself. She wasn't looking for a quick win or an impressive title. She was looking for something that would allow her to grow, personally and professionally, without sacrificing the balance she had fought so hard to find. One evening, as she sat in her living room with a cup of tea, Sarah made a decision. She wasn't going to jump back into the fast-paced, high-stakes world of corporate life without carefully considering the impact it would have on her. But she also knew that she didn't want to close the door on a role that could help her make a real difference. The next morning, Sarah reached out to Elon. "I'm ready," she wrote. "Let's talk about how we can make this work." Sarah woke up to the familiar hum of her alarm clock, a sound that had once been synonymous with rushing, with deadlines, with the never-ending pursuit of success. But today was different. Her decision to return to Tesla, with a commitment to maintain her newfound balance, felt like a declaration, not just to Elon or her colleagues, but to herself. It was a chance to redefine her career, her approach to leadership, and ultimately, her life. As she prepared for her first day back, she reflected on how much had changed over the past few months. The frantic pace that had once dominated her life had given way to a quieter, more intentional way of living. And as much as she was ready to embrace the next challenge, she was determined not to fall back into the same patterns that had once nearly consumed her. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her blazer, trying to prepare herself mentally for the meeting with Elon and the rest of the Tesla leadership team. Today wasn't just a return to her old role. This was going to be something entirely different. It was a new opportunity. One where she was in control of her own boundaries, a role that would allow her to thrive without losing sight of the lessons she had learned during her time away. When she entered Tesla's headquarters, the familiar buzz of the office almost overwhelmed her. The open concept spaces, the teams collaborating, the engineers working furiously on the latest projects, it all felt so familiar and yet so foreign to her now. She had been away long enough to see the culture of the company with new eyes. Elon greeted her with his usual intensity, but this time, there was a slight shift in his demeanor. He was keenly aware of the transformation she had gone through. They didn't need to discuss it explicitly, it was understood. "So, Sarah," Elon said, leading her into the conference room, "I'm excited to have you back. But this time, it's on your terms. We need your expertise, but we also need to make sure that we're building something sustainable. That's what I want you to focus on." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of his words. This wasn't just about leading the company toward innovation. It was about ensuring that the people at Tesla, the engineers, the designers, the marketers, and everyone in between, had the space to be creative and productive without burning out. This wasn't just a job, it was a chance to shape the future in a way that had meaning, both for the company and for its people. "I'm on board," Sarah said, her voice steady. "But I have some ideas about how we can do this. We need to lead by example, not just in terms of the work we produce, but in the way we approach our team's well-being. I want us to create a culture that fosters innovation without sacrificing mental health or personal lives." Elon raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Go on." Sarah paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "We've seen the effects of burnout firsthand. It's a real problem. And the culture at Tesla has always been one of extreme passion, but it's time we acknowledge that without balance, we can't sustain that level of intensity. I propose we integrate mental health initiatives, flexible schedules, and a more structured approach to work-life balance into our leadership model. We can push for groundbreaking advancements, but we do it while protecting the well-being of our team." There was a brief silence in the room as Elon absorbed what she had said. Then, he smiled, a genuine, approving smile. "I like that," he said. "We've been so focused on pushing the boundaries that we've neglected the human element. It's time for a change. Let's make this a priority. You're the perfect person to lead this initiative." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. This wasn't just a return to the grind. It was a chance to make a real impact, not just in terms of innovation, but in the way people worked, the way they lived. She was determined to ensure that Tesla would lead in both productivity and humanity. In the weeks that followed, Sarah threw herself into her new role with a sense of purpose that was different from before. She worked closely with the HR and leadership teams to develop programs that would support employee wellness while also driving the company toward its goals. She implemented flexible work hours, mental health days, and even on-site wellness programs. But she also ensured that the drive for innovation was not compromised. Tesla still had to lead in the electric vehicle space, and the pressure to keep pushing forward was immense. But this time, Sarah knew how to balance the demands. She set clear boundaries for herself: no more 80-hour work weeks, no more sacrifices of personal time for professional gain. She encouraged her team to do the same, and she modeled it in her own behavior. One of the most important changes she made was in how meetings were structured. She implemented more focused, less frequent meetings that allowed her team to dive deeper into projects without constant interruptions. The result was not only an increase in productivity but also a noticeable boost in morale. People were no longer running on fumes, they were working with intention and purpose. It wasn't always easy, especially when some employees struggled to adjust to the new pace. But Sarah was patient, offering support and guidance when needed. And little by little, the culture at Tesla began to shift. People felt seen and heard. They felt valued. One afternoon, as Sarah walked through the office, she saw a small group of engineers huddled around a table, discussing a new design. Their energy was different, not frantic or stressed, but but focused and engaged. They looked at Sarah as she passed by, offering her a nod of acknowledgement. "Hey, Sarah," one of them called out. "We're working on a new prototype. It's something we've been thinking about for a while, but with the new approach, we've got a lot more time to dig into it. It's coming together really well." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. This was what she had hoped for, a culture where people could work creatively without the pressure of constant deadlines looming over them. The balance she had found in her life wasn't just about taking things slower, it was about creating space for the things that truly mattered. She realized that the most innovative ideas often came when people felt supported and had the time to think deeply. Burnout wasn't a prerequisite for success. In fact, it was the opposite. A healthy, well-supported team was the key to long-term success. As Sarah continued to guide Tesla toward a more sustainable future, both in terms of innovation and employee well-being, she felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. She was no longer just a cog in the machine, she was part of something bigger. A company that not only led the world in electric vehicles but also set the standard for how businesses could prioritize their people without sacrificing performance. Sarah's vision for Tesla was taking shape, but no journey toward change is without its challenges. The new initiatives she'd introduced were well received by most, but not everyone was on board. Some senior leaders in the company, particularly those with a more traditional approach to business, were skeptical. They had spent years pushing the company to become what it was, and now Sarah was asking them to slow down, to rethink the relentless drive that had built Tesla's reputation. It wasn't an overt confrontation. It didn't need to be. The resistance came in subtle ways, eye rolls during meetings, passive-aggressive comments, and the occasional raised eyebrow when Sarah proposed something new. There were even moments when her decisions seemed to be undermined, not by direct action, but by an undercurrent of hesitation and doubt that rippled through the leadership team. Sarah could feel it. Her first instinct was to confront it head-on. She was used to fighting for her ideas, used to pushing through resistance, but this time was different. She wasn't just advocating for herself or for the success of the company. She was advocating for a culture shift, a shift that required patience, trust, and understanding. It wasn't just about making Tesla more profitable or innovative, it was about making it a better place to work, a place that fostered long-term growth for both the company and its employees. But when a major issue surfaced, the internal tension became impossible to ignore. It started with a report about production delays. The quarterly numbers were in, and Tesla was falling behind on some key deadlines for vehicle production. The delays weren't catastrophic, but they were significant enough to cause concern in the investor community. The financial analysts were beginning to ask tough questions about Tesla's ability to keep up with demand, especially as new competitors were entering the electric vehicle market. The blame quickly landed on the new approach Sarah had championed. Critics were quick to point out that her focus on work-life balance and sustainability might have slowed the pace at which the company was operating. Could Tesla afford to put people's well-being first when there were production deadlines to meet and stockholders to satisfy? Sarah received a call late one evening from Elon. The tension in his voice was unmistakable. "Sarah, I know you're trying to change things, but these delays are starting to hurt us. We need to ramp up production, and fast. I'm all for the well-being of our employees, but if we fall behind on our targets, the whole company could suffer." Elon's words hit her hard. She had known that balance wasn't going to be easy, but hearing it from Elon, someone who had always pushed for extreme performance, made her second-guess the delicate line she was walking. "I understand, Elon," she replied, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "But we can't sacrifice the changes we've made for short-term results. It's not just about getting the cars out the door, it's about the long-term sustainability of the company. If we push too hard now, we could end up with a burned-out workforce, and that's not something we can recover from easily." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Elon spoke, his voice softer. "I get it, Sarah. But you need to find a way to balance this. I need you to come up with a solution. We can't afford to lose momentum." The weight of Elon's words stayed with Sarah long after the call ended. She had known that the path she was on would be difficult, but now she felt like she was at a crossroads. Was it possible to continue down the road of change and balance, or would she have to compromise everything she believed in for the sake of progress? The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings and discussions with her team, trying to come up with a solution that would appease the skeptics while still holding true to her vision. Sarah knew she couldn't push too hard, she had to take a step back and see the bigger picture. She spent time with her HR department, discussing the need for more flexibility in the production schedule, brainstorming ways to increase productivity without overworking the staff. She consulted with engineers to see if there were any technological solutions that could speed up production without compromising quality. And most importantly, she met with her leadership team to address their concerns directly. One afternoon, she sat down with the team in a private meeting room. The tension was palpable, but Sarah was determined to find a way forward without abandoning her principles. "I know some of you have concerns," she began, her voice calm but firm. "You've worked hard to get Tesla where it is today, and I respect that. But we're at a crossroads, and we need to figure out how we can move forward without sacrificing our people's well-being or the long-term health of the company." She paused, making sure everyone in the room was listening. "I believe that if we make our employees' mental and physical health a priority, they'll produce better work, and we'll be able to hit our targets in a more sustainable way. I'm not asking you to throw away performance. But we need to be smarter about how we approach our work." The room was silent for a moment before one of the senior engineers, a man named Paul, spoke up. "I get what you're saying, Sarah. But we can't ignore the reality of the production schedules. If we don't meet these targets, we're going to lose momentum. People are already starting to get nervous." Sarah nodded, understanding the concern. "I agree, Paul. But what if we focused on optimizing the work that we're already doing? What if we shifted our perspective? Instead of pushing everyone to work harder, let's focus on working smarter. I think there are areas where we can streamline processes, reduce redundancy, and still keep production on track." Another leader, Jenna, added, "That sounds great in theory, but how do we make that shift without risking the delays continuing?" Sarah looked at her team, gathering her thoughts before responding. "I'm not suggesting we stop working toward our goals. But I do believe that we need to build in some additional flexibility. If we can give our employees more time to recharge and incorporate better tools for efficiency, we'll hit our targets in the long run. We have to trust in the process." The following weeks were an intense period of collaboration. Sarah's team worked tirelessly to identify the areas where improvements could be made, pushing for solutions that would optimize workflows and reduce burnout. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was a step in the right direction. Slowly, the delays began to shrink, and morale among the employees began to rise. But even as things improved, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was constantly walking a tightrope. The challenge wasn't just about production schedules or employee well-being. It was about changing a culture that had been built on a foundation of extreme pressure, and the more she navigated through the uncertainty, the more she realized how deep the roots of Tesla's old ways ran. The weeks that followed Sarah's meeting with her leadership team were filled with both progress and tension. As production delays continued to shrink and morale slowly improved, there were still undercurrents of skepticism running through the company. The challenge Sarah faced wasn't just about solving logistical issues. It was about changing a culture that had been built on speed, competition, and relentless pressure. And while some embraced her vision, others clung to the old ways. Sarah knew that change wouldn't happen overnight. But what she hadn't anticipated was how deeply ingrained the culture of burnout and extremes was at Tesla. For some of her colleagues, work-life balance felt like a foreign concept, an unnecessary luxury. For them, success was built on sacrifices, and to shift that mindset was no small feat. One day, after a series of long meetings, Sarah received an unexpected call from Elon. His tone was urgent, his voice tense. "Sarah, I need you to come down to the production floor. Now." The drive to the factory felt long, despite the distance being short. Sarah had a sinking feeling in her stomach, sensing that something had gone terribly wrong. When she arrived, she was met by Elon, who led her through the maze of machinery, engineers, and assembly lines. "This isn't good," Elon said, his face tight with frustration. "We're way behind on the Model Y production schedule. The delays are getting worse, and the investors are starting to ask questions." Sarah's stomach tightened. She had expected challenges, but this was different. This wasn't just a few missed deadlines, this was a real risk to Tesla's credibility. "I thought we were making progress," Sarah replied, trying to steady her nerves. "What's changed?" Elon motioned toward a group of engineers, who were gathered in a huddle, their faces a mix of exhaustion and stress. "They're burnt out. The shifts have been too long, and there are still gaps in the production process that we haven't been able to fix. Some of them are already talking about quitting." Sarah's heart sank. She could see it, the pressure was building, and it was taking its toll. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet or stock prices being affected. These were people. Real, hard-working individuals who were breaking under the strain. She walked over to the group of engineers, her steps slow and deliberate. They looked up at her with weary eyes, but there was no anger in their gaze, just a quiet resignation. "Sarah," one of the engineers, Mark, said softly, "we're trying, but it's like we're being asked to do the impossible. We're working 14-hour days, and there's no end in sight. We're all just burnt out." Sarah felt a pang in her chest. This was the moment she had feared. The very thing she had tried to prevent, the collapse of her team under the pressure of unrealistic expectations, was happening right in front of her. "I understand," she said, her voice steady but filled with empathy. "This has gone too far. I'm going to fix this, but I need you to trust me. We're going to find a way to get back on track, and we'll do it without sacrificing your well-being." The meeting with Elon afterward was tense, and for the first time since her return to Tesla, Sarah found herself on the defensive. "Sarah, I don't know if we have time for this," Elon said, pacing around the conference room. "We need to fix production, and fast. The investors want results." "I get that, Elon," she replied, trying to keep her emotions in check. "But we can't just keep pushing harder. If we don't give people the time to rest and recharge, it'll only make things worse in the long run. I've been looking into ways we can speed up the process without overworking our team." Elon stopped pacing and looked at her, his expression softening. "I know you care about the team, Sarah. But we're running out of time. We need results now." "I'm not suggesting we stop pushing for results," she countered. "But what if we shifted our focus from quantity to quality? We don't need to make every car in the shortest time possible. We need to make each one the best it can be. We'll adjust schedules, maybe introduce more automation, and find a way to give people the breathing room they need." Elon stood silently for a moment, as if weighing her words. Finally, he sighed and sat down across from her. "All right, Sarah. Let's try it your way. But you need to make it work. The clock is ticking." The pressure Sarah had felt over the past few months was now a constant weight on her shoulders. She couldn't afford to fail. She knew that the decisions she made over the next few weeks could either make or break her vision for Tesla's future. Sarah immediately called an all-hands meeting, gathering every engineer, designer, and production staff member in the company. She needed to speak directly to the team, to show them that she was still committed to their well-being, but also that they were all in this together. "I know things have been tough," she began, standing before the large group. "I know many of you are feeling burned out, and I want to tell you, right now, that I hear you. We are going to fix this, and we're going to do it together." There was a murmur of acknowledgement from the group, but Sarah could see the exhaustion in their faces. It was real. People were breaking. But she wasn't going to let this be the end. She wasn't going to let Tesla fall into the trap of sacrificing its core values for the sake of speed. "We're going to take a step back," Sarah continued. We're going to reorganize our schedules, introduce more automation to streamline some of the processes, and we're going to implement mandatory rest periods. I know you've been working incredibly hard, but we can't keep pushing the way we have been. It's not sustainable, and it's not fair to any of you." She paused, letting her words sink in. Then, with a renewed sense of determination, she added, "I believe in this team. I believe we can push forward, not by working harder, but by working smarter. We'll fix these delays, but we'll do it in a way that protects our people." The room was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, a few hands began to rise. The nods of agreement were hesitant at first, but they grew in strength as Sarah spoke, as she shared her vision for a better, more sustainable Tesla. Later that evening, as Sarah sat at her desk, reviewing the changes she had just proposed, she couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The tension, the doubt, the resistance, it had all been building to this. She had come to Tesla not just to lead, but to change the very culture of the company. But as the weight of the challenge continued to settle over her, she knew there was no turning back. This was the moment that would define her leadership. She could either make the changes she believed in, or she could let the pressure break her. The choice was hers. After the tense meeting with her leadership team and the new initiative she set in motion, Sarah tried to push forward, hoping the changes she had proposed would help fix the issues plaguing Tesla's production lines. The pressure on her shoulders was immense, yet she had to remain composed, not just for her team, but for the future of the company. She had already made a decision. This wasn't just about making cars, it was about making a company that prioritized its people. It was time to put those words into action. But every leader knows that change is never straightforward. The true test of any vision is not in the good moments, but in the crisis that forces you to reevaluate and adjust course. And for Sarah, a crisis was brewing on the horizon. It started with a meeting she didn't expect. A large group of investors had gathered to meet with her, and as she walked into the conference room, she immediately felt the tension in the air. These were the people who had put their faith, and money, into Tesla, but they weren't here to congratulate her on the initiative she'd rolled out. They were here to get answers. Elon was there too, his presence commanding the room, as always. Sarah sat beside him, trying to maintain a calm demeanor despite the growing anxiety she felt. One of the lead investors, a sharp-eyed man named Gregory, leaned forward and spoke before anyone could say a word. "Sarah, let's get straight to the point. We've been watching the numbers. Tesla is behind schedule, and production costs are rising. You've promised us a new direction, but we're seeing delays. What are you doing to resolve this?" The words hung in the air, sharp and unrelenting. Sarah took a breath. She had been anticipating this moment, but facing it head-on was still daunting. "Gregory, I hear your concerns, and I understand the gravity of the situation. But what we're facing isn't just a simple case of missing deadlines, we're looking at systemic issues that require a deeper approach. We're focusing on efficiency and long-term productivity, not just immediate results. What we're doing is preparing Tesla for the future, and that means rethinking how we operate." Elon interjected, his voice tinged with frustration. "I'm all for the new vision, but we can't afford to lose sight of what's happening now. Investors want results, and they want them yesterday." Sarah turned to Elon, a mixture of concern and determination in her eyes. "We will meet those expectations, Elon. But the cost of doing so without considering the bigger picture could harm us in the long run. We have to fix the root causes, not just patch things up." Gregory leaned back, arms crossed. "I'm not sure the root causes matter if we don't meet the quarterly targets. Our shareholders expect growth, and growth means scaling production. If you can't deliver on that, we'll have to reconsider our support." There was an uncomfortable silence in the room as Sarah took in Gregory's words. She could feel the weight of his message, but she refused to back down. "We're scaling production, but we're doing it responsibly. I'm confident that we'll see results in the coming months. However, I need you to trust that we're making the right moves for the long-term health of the company. This is about more than just today. It's about building a sustainable future for Tesla. The room buzzed with murmurs as Sarah finished speaking, but the investors remained unconvinced. The pressure was mounting, and the idea of trust, the trust she was asking from them, felt fragile at best. As the meeting ended and the investors filed out of the room, Sarah felt the weight of their words settle on her. Was she asking too much? Was her vision too idealistic for the reality Tesla faced? Elon, she said quietly, after the room had emptied, I think we need to make some adjustments. They're right about one thing, we're under pressure, and we need to find a way to balance the vision with reality. Elon's expression softened, though there was still a trace of skepticism in his eyes. I agree, Sarah. But this can't just be about keeping the investors happy. If we push too hard, we could end up losing the very thing we're trying to save, the soul of this company. She nodded, appreciating his words, even though the task ahead was daunting. We need to move quickly. But we can't compromise on the values that brought us here. We're Tesla, and we're not just about getting cars out the door. We're about creating something bigger. The next few days were filled with tension. Sarah called her team together and laid out a new plan to address both the immediate production goals and the long-term changes she believed in. The balance was precarious, but it was all she could think of. They needed to meet targets, but they couldn't do it at the cost of everything they'd built. Her new strategy was a delicate dance, focusing on efficiency without sacrificing the health of the workforce. She put together smaller task forces to streamline workflows, identifying bottlenecks that could be addressed quickly with minimal disruption. She also pushed for the development of new technologies and processes that would help with automation, aiming to increase production without forcing employees to work longer hours. However, despite her best efforts, the cracks were starting to show. Even as Tesla worked tirelessly to hit production targets, the pressure on Sarah and her team grew. The once energized atmosphere began to feel strained, and Sarah could see the exhaustion creeping back into the faces of her colleagues. People were tired, and the long days were taking a toll on them once again. Late one evening, Sarah sat in her office, staring at the production charts on her screen. The numbers weren't good. She could feel the weight of the decisions she had made, and was still making, pressing down on her. For the first time, she questioned whether she had made the right choice in trying to change Tesla's culture. The vision that once seemed so clear now felt like a distant dream. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Sarah. It was her chief engineer, Mark. He looked exhausted but determined. We've got a problem. What's going on? Sarah asked, standing up quickly. There's been a critical failure on one of the production lines. It's going to delay everything, and it's going to cost us more money. We're talking about several weeks of delay. Sarah's heart sank. This wasn't just a setback, it was a serious blow to the progress they had made. How bad is it? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Bad enough, Mark replied grimly. We're going to need to pause production for a while to fix it. Sarah's mind raced, but her body felt numb. The crisis she had feared had arrived, and it was worse than she had imagined. They were facing a major setback at the exact time they needed to prove themselves to their investors. As she sat in the quiet aftermath of the conversation, Sarah was faced with a choice. The path she had chosen wasn't just challenging, it was beginning to feel like it might be untenable. The pressure to deliver results without compromising her values was at a breaking point, and she knew she couldn't continue forward if the company, and her team, were going to crack under the strain. But there was no going back now. The days that followed the production failure were like a blur. Sarah couldn't escape the heavy weight of what was at stake. The numbers on the spreadsheets, the investor calls, and the pressure from Elon and the leadership team all collided into one point of absolute urgency. She had to make a choice that could either redefine Tesla or send it spiraling into chaos. After a sleepless night, Sarah found herself walking down the hallways of the Tesla factory, her mind still clouded with uncertainty. The sounds of machines and workers filled the air, but the hustle didn't ease the turmoil inside her. Every step seemed to echo her internal dilemma. The factory was buzzing, but the people who worked in it, who powered the very heart of the company, were visibly drained. She could see it in their faces, they were running on fumes, barely keeping it together. Her phone rang, snapping her back into reality. It was Elon. "Sarah, we need to talk." "Now," he said, his tone sharp. She sighed, her mind racing, knowing that she couldn't afford to ignore this. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." Elon was already waiting for her in his usual spot near the production line, pacing back and forth. His eyes were filled with frustration, but there was a nervous edge to his usual confidence. "Sarah, this is bad. The delays are pushing us further behind. We need a solution, fast," Elon said, running a hand through his hair. "I know, Elon," she replied, trying to keep her voice calm. "But we can't just keep pushing harder. If we do, we risk burning out the whole team, and we'll be right back where we started." He stopped pacing and turned to face her. "I get that. But we don't have the luxury of time right now. The investors are breathing down our necks, and we need results, or this entire thing is going to implode." Sarah looked out at the factory floor, where workers were laboring intensely, but there was something different now. There was no excitement in their eyes, only weariness. The energy that once filled the room was being drained by the constant pressure. "Maybe the problem is that we're trying to solve this the same way we always have," Sarah said softly, her words catching in her throat. "Maybe we need to stop thinking about how we can push harder and start thinking about how we can build something more sustainable." Elon's gaze hardened, his jaw tightening. "I don't think we have time for sustainability, Sarah. We're in the middle of a race. If we don't finish strong, it's over." The tension between them was palpable, but Sarah refused to back down. "We'll finish strong, but we have to do it the right way. I can't sacrifice the team for short-term gains." Elon looked at her with a mixture of admiration and frustration. "I get it. But what do you suggest we do?" She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she knew was a pivotal moment. "We need to scale back for a bit. Reevaluate our processes. Take a short pause to realign. We can't keep pushing people past their limits. We need to give them time to rest, to recover, and to work on smarter solutions, not harder ones. We also need to invest in automating the parts of production that are causing the delays." Elon stared at her for a moment, clearly conflicted. The thought of slowing down, even just temporarily, was almost unthinkable. "I don't know, Sarah. It feels like a huge risk. And if we pause, how do we explain it to the investors?" "I'll explain it," she said firmly, "but only if I believe it's the right thing to do. If we keep pushing, we'll burn out the team and disappoint the investors anyway. Let's invest in innovation instead of just running faster. We'll come out ahead in the end." The decision wasn't easy for Sarah, and as the days passed, doubt began to creep in. She had already seen what happened when she tried to change the culture. She'd already faced resistance from investors, from Elon, and even from her own team. This new proposal to pause the production and reevaluate Tesla's entire approach could either be the turning point Tesla needed or the fatal mistake that would lead to its downfall. One evening, while reflecting on the last few months, Sarah found herself in the quiet solitude of her office. She replayed every conversation she had had with Elon, with investors, and with her team. Every decision, every compromise, had led her to this exact moment. And while the fear of failure gnawed at her, she knew that change, true change, required courage, and sometimes, it required a risk. She didn't want to just fix the immediate issues, she wanted to create something that would last, something that could weather any storm. She needed to focus on the long-term health of the company, and that meant investing in the people who made it all possible. If Tesla could thrive, it would only be because the people working there thrived first. Sarah didn't have long to dwell on her thoughts before she was summoned to a final meeting with the investors. They were eager to hear from her, and she knew that whatever decision she made would be met with intense scrutiny. She entered the conference room, her heart pounding. The familiar faces of the investors stared at her, waiting for her to speak. "I understand the pressure we're under, and I'm here to be transparent with all of you," Sarah began. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "We've been pushing ourselves to the limit for months now, trying to meet our production goals. But we've reached a point where pushing harder isn't the solution. It's time for a shift." There was a collective murmur around the room, and she could feel the tension rise. She continued, "What we need is a short-term pause, a recalibration of our processes, a rethinking of how we scale production. It's about quality over quantity. We need to invest in our people and the tools that will allow us to succeed in the long term." Gregory, one of the lead investors, spoke up, his voice cold. "You're suggesting that we slow down production when we're already behind? That's a huge risk, Sarah. The market won't wait for us." "I understand the risk," Sarah replied. "But if we continue down this path without addressing the root issues, we'll face an even bigger crisis in the future. What I'm proposing is not a setback, it's an investment in our future." There was silence for a long moment as the investors absorbed her words. Sarah could see the skepticism on their faces, but there was something else, a flicker of doubt, perhaps even curiosity. Finally, Elon spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "I'm with Sarah on this one. It's a tough decision, but I believe it's the right one." There was a long pause. Then, Gregory leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "All right, Sarah. You've got your pause. But you better make it count." Sarah left the meeting with a heavy heart, the weight of the decision still pressing on her. She had taken a huge risk, but now, she had to prove that her faith in the team, in the long-term vision, was not misplaced. The next few weeks would be critical. As Sarah sat alone in her office later that evening, watching the factory through the window, she allowed herself a moment to reflect on everything she had fought for. Change was never easy, and it was never without cost. But it was the only way forward. Now, more than ever, she had to ensure that Tesla's future wasn't just about production, it was about creating something sustainable, for the company and for the people who believed in it. And it all started now. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?